Welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code. I'm Kathy, and this is the space where we dive into real-life parenting stories. Because let's face it, raising kids today can feel like trying to crack a complicated code. Together we'll explore the ups and downs, share insights, and swap tips that make this journey a little smoother. So grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's unlock the parenting code together. Today, I'm excited to introduce Becky Nieves, a mom of four who is raising children across a wide range of ages, from her two sons, aged 21 and 2, to her two daughters, aged 13 and 9. Becky shares her unique journey as a Marine mom, a rare disease mom, and a neurodivergent mom, giving us an inside look into how she juggles it all while running a business and serving as an active school board member. Becky, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm so happy to be here.
Becky, let's start with your personal parenting story and what challenges you faced, how you navigated the situation, and what you learned. It's likely that someone listening to this episode will hear something in your parenting story that helps them along the parenting road.
Yes, so parenting was a very unexpected road that I found myself on. I actually never wanted children. Funny thing to hear when you hear somebody say they have four. I found myself a mom at the age of 19. I was in college. So I had to juggle being a full-time college student, working full-time, and being mom as well. And then I spent 7 years as a single mother. I met my now husband, and we decided to add three more to the mix. Um, and each child has brought a completely unique set of gifts as well as challenges.
Can you explain maybe, what are some of the challenges? Like you have a very unique family, unit. So what are some of the unique challenges that you faced and how did you handle them?
Yeah, well, initially being, a blended family, my husband did an amazing job taking on the step parent role. And he really is the only father figure that my oldest son has had. And even with all that turmoil of, being a young teenage single mom for so many years, and we know the statistics generally around being a teenage mom and those children who are born of teenage moms. I think the biggest thing that I can take out of that chapter of my life is that you don't have to fall victim to the statistics. I finished my bachelor's degree. I met a wonderful man and we have an amazing life. And my son has turned out pretty well. I mean, it's challenging parenting an adult, but he graduated high school with honors. He is in his final year of college, and he is a United States Marine reservist. And he's also a neurodivergent child. So he managed to, I think about my odds, but it's more about his odds, being the son of a teenage mom and all the challenges that he faced and that we faced and learned together growing. And he's accomplished so much, and I couldn't be prouder of him.
What was his challenge, his neurodivergent challenge?
Yeah, so he was ADHD, and it's very funny because for the most part, when you have an ADHD child, from at least from the literature that I have read, boys tend to skew to the more hyperactive, and girls are the inattentive. It's the reverse in my two children. My son was the inattentive, and my daughter is the hyperactive. As a matter of fact, my son almost well, he did actually fly under the radar at public school. He was failing second grade, and he was sent for evaluation, and they were ready to classify him special education. They said, "Oh, he's got a low IQ, he's just special education." And I said, "Something doesn't feel right." My mama instincts kicked in, and I said, "I don't accept that." So I went and I had him taken to our local children's hospital and seen by neurology there. And they're like, "He's ADHD. He's not special education." So for not me trusting my mama instinct, he would have been classified special education and not accomplished where he is at today, quite frankly. He was, we did go with the medication route, and he went from nearly failing second grade to a straight A student for the rest of his career.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I always, that's one of the many reasons that I got involved in public education. I did not want that to happen to another family. A mama who maybe didn't feel like it was their place to step up and question what, you've got a whole child study team in front of you. You've got a school psychologist and a special education teacher and a learning consultant, and they're all telling you these things like, no, your child's got an IQ of whatever, and they're just special education. And it took a lot to say, no, I don't accept that. And thankfully, we were able to overcome that.
Well, you must have still been quite a young mother at the time. So that probably took quite a bit of courage to stand up to authority and, and say, I don't think so, and stand up for your son till you found out, some kind of a solution.
Yes, and I also credit my husband too. He came to those early child study teams and he kind of looked at me and he's like, "No, I don't think so either." He took a very active role in parenting, even when we were dating. We tried tutoring and we tried everything under the sun and it came down to that and we just trusted our gut. So, I was, we all were very fortunate that we had each other. Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so tell me about the other three children and any challenges connected with them.
Yes. So child number two, my 13-year-old daughter, Leanna, so that she is the first biological child that I had with my husband. So we had just kind of dealt with our son's diagnosis. And literally, I was at the hospital, I was giving birth. It was actually a repeat C-section for me. I've had four C-sections, so all my children were C-sections. So I couldn't see anything. They had that mysterious curtain up. And I kind of start to hear whispers and I got a little nervous and I kind of looked at my husband and he's looking back at me and everybody looks very confused. And I'm like, please, somebody just tell me what it is. And they're like, she has platinum blonde hair. Now, I am Puerto Rican, tan, dark hair. My husband is also Puerto Rican, tan, dark hair. So, how do you make a platinum blonde, very pale baby? So very early on, the diagnosis of albinism was brought up. Um, an ophthalmologist. We took her to the eye doctor because they noted immediately that her eyes had a back and forth movement, which is actually called nystagmus, and she was very sensitive to light. When we would take her outside, she would scream, shut her eyes very tight. Um, so once we got that diagnosis, fortunately, we have very good health insurance. We were able to consult genetics and they drew blood from my husband and myself to try to figure out what subtype of albinism it was, because there are several. And the test kept coming back negative. So like, oh, maybe it's some unknown form of albinism, which happens in rare diseases. She turned about 9 months at this point. She started to crawl and she started to bruise. Her legs were covered in bruises. And I myself, I am a I admit it, I'm a type A Google mom. It's what I do. I don't generally tend to wait for the research to filter down by whatever authority. I started Googling, and in my search, I kind of put down albinism and bruising, and up comes this website for a rare disease called Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. And I started reading, and the more I read, the more I was convinced that that's what our daughter had. At about the same time, the Children's Hospital came back and was like, wait a minute, you guys are of Puerto Rican descent, right? And we're like, yeah. They're like, there's this really weird, rare condition called Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. It primarily affects people of Puerto Rican descent. Maybe we should test her for it. Then that challenge was they lost her blood sample. They had to draw blood again on an infant, which is a whole other experience to be sure. But finally, at the age of 18 months, I got that phone call. The day is very vivid in my head. I was in the middle of my kitchen. I was cooking chicken parm. It was almost dinner time. My husband was almost on his way home from work. I saw the number and it was the Children's Hospital. And they're like, we're sorry to have to tell you that your daughter does have Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome type 1. Um, I thanked them. They said, well, we're here when you want to come in, discuss the results. I hung up, called my husband right away. At that point, I knew what that diagnosis meant. It meant not only did she have albinism, so she was light sensitive, needed sunscreen when she was outdoors. She's legally blind. She has a bleeding disorder. It's a platelet dysfunction. Her blood does not clot as it should. These individuals also can develop a Crohn's-like type of issue and a fatal pulmonary fibrosis in her case. Usually doesn't present until the third or fourth decade. So, that was a pivotal moment in my parenting journey because at that point I had to make a decision, let my world fall apart or be proactive. Um, it's not in my nature to, I definitely fell apart for a bit. At the time, I was in the middle of a master's degree. My intent was to get a master's in rehab counseling, and I wanted to be a high school guidance counselor. But I paused it. I wasn't mentally in a space where I could continue. I let myself kind of wallow for about 3 days. It just so happened that the organization who was dealing with awareness and research was having a conference in like 3 weeks. And luckily, it was close by enough that it was a 2.5 hour drive. We drove up. I met with the executive director of the organization, and I said, put me to work, whatever it is that you need me to do. And that was 12 years ago. So I'm on the board of directors of that organization now. Um, I work with other rare diseases helping advocate. We've launched a database for our patients. Um, it changed the trajectory of my life in yet another way because now I found myself a special education parent to two children. Um, and in a position that, like I said, was not on my bingo card to be. Stay-at-home mom was not in the cards. But given that in her early years we did have a lot of early intervention services and therapists, it made more sense for me to stay home. So we became a one-income household. Um, yeah, that was a big one. That was a big pivot.
And
That
how is
second,
she today?
she is, we kind of joke within our little rare disease community that these kiddos, these adults with HPS, they have a little something extra. They are such an amazing bunch. And, given the fact that she is legally blind, she reads 2 to 3 grade levels ahead of where she is. She dances 6+ hours a week. She plays the flute. She wants to go to law school and has been pretty insistent on wanting to do that for the past few years. She's only in eighth grade and she wants to sit on the Supreme Court one of these days. So, you know, the sky is the limit for her. I am so lucky to be her mom because even with all the adversity that she has faced, and she now knows, we told her this past year the extent of her diagnosis, and she took it very well. She took it like a champ. She really did. And she's like, well, she's like, now I understand why you work as hard as you do with this organization. Um, and she's started advocating herself now. There was a rare disease advocacy week for teens and young adults, and she participated and spoke to our legislators and asked for action on bills that would help, facilitate a faster pipeline for cures for rare diseases. I mean, she's mind blowing, really is.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you've given her a solid foundation to like it's not easy to have challenges, extra challenges as a parent. It's not easy to be a person who has those challenges, but in order to for something to sound like as positive as what, it sounds like from your description of everything, there must be some real magic going on in your household as far as parenting and instilling that kind of sense of resiliency and like that's a really big thing.
It is. And I think part of it stems from my own childhood. The one prerequisite I had when I took on the parenting role was I was going to do things totally different than what my own parents did. Um, you know, I grew up not an physical abusive household, but there was definitely some emotional neglect. Um, and it left me with my own trauma. And my one goal in life is always to be do better than what my parents, not do better, but just know better too as well.
Mhm.
With my degree and with my background, you know, my parents may have done the best that they could at that point in time. I knew better and I knew how I turned out. And I never wanted my children to feel the way I did as a child and struggled through young adulthood. And I kind of use that as the guiding star of my parenting philosophy. Um, it has not always been easy, but given how they've turned out so far, we've kind of been okay.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot to be proud of, like for challenges. I actually was wondering when you were first talking, I was wondering, how did you come to be this strong and independent and like this positive outlook? The first thing I thought was, wow, you must have had an amazing childhood. But it sounds like it's kind of the opposite, that you've taken, adversity from your childhood and just raise the bar for yourself and for your family.
Yes, and I think early on, generally in my field, one of my first jobs out of college was actually in a correctional facility. So I got to study a lot of individuals who, generally when they end up in a correctional facility, it's because they've come from, again, not so great circumstances. So just in my life and my work experiences, I have found that, when you're dealt a childhood trauma, you can go one of two ways. You can kind of follow in that same road, or you can just go the total opposite way. It tends to affect people differently, even amongst my own siblings. Um, there's three of us. Two of us are very high performing, high achieving individuals, and one of us is not. We all grew up with the same set of parents, and that's just how, the dice kind of rolled out. Um, the only thing I knew going in was like, I just want to do better, know better, and raise stronger children. And again, it kind of got to the point, I had my moments, sure, where I broke down, where I did things I shouldn't have done. I got angry and upset. When we first got her diagnosis and we went to that conference that weekend, we sat in a session and the geneticist had kind of tiptoed around the pulmonary fibrosis a little bit. Um, so intellectually, I knew, but I had not been told so bluntly. And we were sitting in a session with a nurse practitioner from actually the NIH. And, they were like, HPS type 1, 100% is pulmonary fibrosis. And that was the first time we had heard that statement. My husband looked over at me, and I'm generally the strong one. I'm not a big crier. I kind of keep it together. I almost didn't make it out of the room, and I kind of managed to leave a room. We're in a hotel. It's a conference hotel. I made it out to the hallway, kind of dropped to my knees, sobbing hysterically, and at this point, he never had seen that from me ever. I really scared him. He managed to get me back to our hotel room. The kids, they were in childcare, and I probably cried for about 2 or 3 hours. And after that, I, finished and said, I can't, I haven't come this far in life and I haven't overcome the challenges that I have to, let something take me down. We have this child, and children are going to mimic, what you portray. You're their model. So if they see you not able to deal, not able to handle, if they see you so concerned and worried, like if I had treated my child like if she were made of glass and, you know, quite frankly, would drop dead at any moment, she would not be the resilient child that she is today. So, I think as parents, we have our moments and we're allowed to have those moments. Um, but in the back of my mind, I remember myself as a child seeing things I shouldn't have seen and how that affected my development. So I knew I needed to act a little bit differently with my own children.
So how do you get there? Becky, like like lots of people, lots of parents at some point or another is kind of, pretty close to rock bottom with something like whatever it is, a result of a diagnosis, a result of just total exhaustion or, a number of other things. But not everybody has the tool set to be able to pick themselves back up again. So
Yes.
how would you help a parent who's facing something, who's really going through a traumatic time? How do you what advice do you have? What suggestions, what tricks to help yourself stay positive and understand the importance of how you behave in front of your child?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think my background in psychology was definitely a benefit to me. I definitely leaned on skills that I had learned in that regard. And I think another thing too that I shouldn't discount is that, when we got her diagnosis, I sought out a therapist. My husband and I both, we went to therapy.
Mhm.
And, because it was such a traumatic event, we needed outside guidance on how to parent, how to wrap our own heads around this diagnosis. And there is no shame in that. I think too often there's such a stigma attached to mothers, to mental health. And like you should be able to do it all. You should be able to have a full-time job, your house is clean and dinner's on the table and your kids are happy and healthy. And that is an illusion and it's a myth. We all need help and we all need balance. And I think it was me finding that balance. And one of the, just for me personally, and I've counseled this, I became an advocate for other parents once they got their diagnosis and they were newly diagnosed and talking them through it, and I would tell them, you have to make a choice. And the choice being, you can choose to be proactive or you could choose to not be proactive. You can let the diagnosis beat you or you can make something of it. Um, in my head, I was like, I'm not going to let this win. It's just not going to win. And I think keeping myself busy and involved, it let me feel like I was contributing at that point. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm going to help. I'm not going to be able to cure the disease. I'm not a scientist. I'm a mom. But, whatever I've been able to do to help others is what I've done.
Well, there's nothing quite so powerful as a mom who's, on some kind of a mission that's totally driven from, passion and heart. There's nothing more powerful.
You
So, okay, so that's number two. How did
know.
you how did you even with those challenges, how did you decide you wanted to have more?
That was a very long conversation that we had, because my husband's plan and our plan, before we got married and discussed how many more children we wanted to have, it was okay. We're gonna have two more children because since I already had my first, and I wanted to be done having children by the time I was 30. So we were gonna wait a year after her birth and try again, and I would be done at 30, and hey, life would be good. You know what they say, man makes plans and God laughs, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's had a very nice stroke at my expense, I will tell you that. So, needless to say, that did not happen. We met with genetics. They gave us some very hard, cold truths. It was, your husband and yourself are both carriers. So each pregnancy is a 25% chance of having an affected child, a 25% of having a unaffected child, and a 50% chance of having an unaffected child who's a carrier. Okay, so we knew the odds. And it took a little bit. So I ended up being about 2.5 years past my 30-year goal. And we said, okay, we're gonna do it. And then again, man makes plans, God laughs. I get pregnant with twins.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And um, I don't think I had told you this previously. So boy, girl twins. Um, and I made it up until 32 weeks of gestation, went in for an appointment and was told we can't find the heartbeat of baby B. And of course, it was the one ultrasound that my husband did not attend. He was at work, couldn't get out of a meeting. And they're like, take your time, do whatever you need to do. I called my husband and he picked up. And again, anytime I cry, he knows that the world is near ending. Um, and I said, you need to come get me. I was like, I can't make it home, and I was half hysterical at that point. So he raced, he managed to get the story out of me. I don't remember the rest of that day. He tells me that I drove home. I swear that we left my car there and we came back and got it. I literally have no memory of the rest of the day. But at that moment, again, it was like another test. As much as I wanted to fall apart, I had to remember I was still carrying one more child,
Mhm.
and I needed to carry that child for another 5 weeks. Actually, I had to carry both children for 5 more weeks, knowing that one was no longer with us. Um, and we did. I made it to 37 weeks, and I kept my emotions kind of bottled up. I didn't want to do anything to upset the pregnancy. Gave birth. Because of the level of gestation, we were required to have a funeral and a burial service. And, I'm there with a 9-day-old infant and burying her brother. Um,
Wow.
it was the juxtaposition, it was a lot. At that point of my parenting, like I really started to question my own spirituality, my life's purpose. And I'm like, dear God, how much can one person take? Just one thing after another thing after another thing. And the thing that kept running through my mind that kept me going is like, you can't fall apart. Depending on which child I was dealing with, whether it was the newborn or my 13-year-old daughter, my older son, it's like they need you.
Mhm.
And no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much I wanted to just lay it all down, it was like you have to keep going because you have people depending on you. Um, and that's really how we made it through. And again, I kind of credit, my involvement with the nonprofit and the volunteering work because my life had purpose at that point. It was beyond me. There was a whole rare disease community, depending on the services that I was providing. And I said, I have to keep going. There's, there wasn't another, I didn't see another out. And there were definitely, dark times, and I'm not going to say that I'm a superwoman because I am not. I spent a lot of time in therapy. I, when I needed to take medication, I did,
Yeah.
depression and anxiety and all of those things reared its ugly head, especially postpartum. I dealt with postpartum depression for each of my pregnancies. Um, it was a lot and it tested, my marriage quite frequently. Um, but it has also made my marriage stronger too because my husband and I look at each other even on the days we don't like each other very much, which happens quite frequently. Um, and it's like we've been through this amazing life, and only we know what this life and journey has been. And we're a team, because neither one of us we don't really have family support, so it's us almost on our little island, and our kids. And like I said, I don't want to make myself sound out like I'm superhuman because I'm not. You know, I I willingly admit that I'm an F-bomb mom.
Mhm.
I swear like a sailor. I really and honestly truly do. I have a dry, sarcastic sense of humor. I'm the type of person who people kind of love me or hate me. And I'm okay with that. And again, I always say, like, as long as I can look my children in the eyes, I can look myself in the mirror and lay my head down at night knowing I've done the best that I can. Not that I'm perfect, but I've done the best that I can for that day, then I'm okay.
Yeah, I find that um there's a lot of, little tricks and strategies to help with mental health, but personally, I find it a constant awareness that I have to have. And sometimes it seems like that dark hole is just waiting to suck you up. And sometimes you get knee deep and you have to scramble to get out. But and I know it's different for every person, but I really do think in order to stay, healthy mentally, it's a lot of work all the time, like all the time. So,
Absolutely. It's a constant monitoring of those, okay, today's a little dark, or today, it's like taking your temperature, your mental temperature every day,
yeah,
and knowing what does it for you. I mean, I am an introvert by nature, so I know when I need to decompress. It might be curling up with a good book, just spending time with my kids. Like, it's finding those small self-care things, even if it's 5 minutes where you lock yourself in the bathroom,
yeah.
whether it's screaming into a pillow, whatever it is that you need to do, you know. And it also is being your authentic self too. People will, you'll be surprised how kind people can be to you and
Mhm.
how willing they are to help. And you don't have to go it alone. You find your tribe, you find your community, and, the person that you can call and say, "Hey, I've had a really crappy day. Like, can I just vent?" And sometimes that's all it takes, is just having that friend to listen. And the no judgment friend, as I like to call it. I have two friends that I know I can call and say what pretty much whatever I want, with as many expletives as I want, and they still love me. Um, yeah,
Good.
and it's also, I think too, I've learned an important lesson is apologizing to my children,
Mm.
um, on my bad days, when I snap at them or threaten to lock them in a closet, which happen, like, there are days where that happens. I am far from perfect. And then it's going back and saying, "Hey, mommy was having a bad day and I'm sorry." And they're like, "Yeah, mom, maybe I wasn't." And they're pretty insightful. They'll say, "Mom, I was acting a little off kilter. We had a bad day." And, and just moving on from there, I think.
Yeah, I that's how I work with children, and that's how we raised our son too, was like just being real.
Yeah.
And I want, have you noticed, because you've got an adult son, and I do too. And uh, so have you been able to have, deeper conversations with him about, like, okay, you were a teenager when you conceived him, and that was a different world and a different, you know, structure of family, or lack thereof. So as an adult son, what's that relationship like?
Uh, Still kind of fraught with conflict. He's 21, so he's still kind of self-centered and self-absorbed. We haven't lost that teenage trait yet. Um, but yeah, we had the conversation. At this point, it's now a running joke. When he got old enough to kind of put two and two together, he's like, "Wait a minute, I was born when you were 19 and you were in college." He's like, "I wasn't planned." And I'm like, he put that together. And I said, "You might not have been planned, but you were wanted."
Mhm.
You know, and I was very honest with him at that point. He was old enough to have this conversation with. And I said, I had options and I chose the option that I did. And I don't have a regret. Was it hard? Absolutely. I was like, and I tell him all the time, I'm like, it's still hard to raise you. I mean, sometimes there are days, well, most days at this point, I actually prefer the 2-year-old to him, honestly, because at least the 2-year-old is cute and gives me cuddles. The 21-year-old, not so much. You're not getting hugs and cuddles. So,
There's a lot of
so now,
similarities, though, between that 2-year-old and that 20-year-old, 21-year-old. There's a lot of similarities in those two developmental time periods.
yes,
Mm.
yes, except I can't put the 21-year-old in timeout, but as much as I would love to. So now, we've made a joke out of it almost. Like, he'll tell his younger siblings, "Well, I was the trial baby, so she did all the bad stuff and tried it out on me and you guys, And I'm like, but and we just actually had this conversation 2 days ago. And I said, "You know what, considering statistically speaking, I come from a background of two parents who didn't graduate high school, who were teen parents themselves. I was a teen parent. We grew up poor. And just statistically, both myself and my son, we've beaten the odds. I shouldn't be at the position where I'm at in life. And, if you look at other people with similar backgrounds, I was like, I did make some mistakes parenting you. And I readily admit them to him all the time.
Yeah.
I don't try to gloss over the mistakes that I've made. I don't with my children. I'm very authentic, within reason, obviously, and for their
Mhm.
developmental age. But I'm like, yeah, like if I had to do it again, I would do this and I would do that, and things would be different, maybe, maybe not. But just honesty within limits again. But no, like I told him, I was like, yeah, there's some things that I definitely regret, but I couldn't have done all that bad because here we are,
Yeah.
and my philosophy too on a bad day is I've made it through 100% of my bad days up until today. So the odds are pretty good I'm gonna make it through this one too.
I have found it really, really, really helpful, the practice of just before going to sleep, like after I'm in bed, after I've read for a little bit, I know I'm gonna, zone out within seconds. But the very last thing I do, and especially on days that have been really, really hard, is I search for anything I'm grateful, no matter how small, even if it was just the weather or anything. And especially at the end of a really tough day, when I can pick out and put a spotlight on some of those things that, like really just grateful that, my husband is still here, that my son is healthy. Like those things that you take for granted, there's always something. And I don't know, I find that to be quite effective too, to just try to stay above and to stay positive and realize, could be worse. So what about
Absolutely.
number 3? Did she end up um, having the same rare disease or being a carrier, or was she the 25%?
So funny enough, and I don't know why this is the case, they actually won't test. She's not affected, but they won't test for carrier status until they're 18, which I
Okay.
suppose I understand because at that point, they might not want to know that they're a carrier. So
Yeah.
once they turn 18, they can make that decision on their own.
Okay.
But she's not affected. But she is also my neurospicy little girl, but very hyperactive. So everything that I thought I knew about ADHD up until that point, right out the window. Totally presented differently. I mean, this summer in particular was a huge challenge. I finally came to the point where, again, we needed to go on medication. But she is scary brilliant.
Mm.
And part of, I think, her restlessness is that she does get bored in school. Like she
Mm.
requires a constant challenge, a constant stimulation. Um, she's in dance also. She dances 4 hours a week. We tried soccer for about a year. I decided that I hated coaching soccer almost as much as actually no, I actually prefer cleaning bathrooms to coaching soccer. Um, it was an experience. Youth sports are a
Yeah.
whole thing. I could do a whole podcast on that, but needless to say, we did not go back to soccer. But dance, I prefer to write a check, drop them off. They get taught, they come back out, and I don't have to deal with the politics of youth sports. So, but she's amazing too, and her own challenges as well. She knows that she was a twin, um, and still feels that loss.
Mm.
I'm actually it's so hard to find child therapists.
Yeah.
And we're now in that position where I'm trying to get her into therapy, not just to manage her ADHD, but I know she has some trauma and some anxiety and for that loss as well. And just trying to help her navigate that too. We do, visit his grave um frequently, and I tell her, to journal her feelings. Like if you wanted to speak to him, write a letter to him, and having her have different ways to express herself, whether it's through art or through dance or through writing, and making sure she has multiple mediums to let some of that energy out, I
Mhm.
think has been the best thing that we could do. And always being available to talk, even
Yeah.
when It's hard, because as a family, we suffered that loss. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but I also wanted to let her know that it's okay to let me know that you're sad
Yeah.
and that you want to talk about it. Um, and that's we've kept that open line of communication throughout.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think that's the biggest part of parenting is that, you're able to have that kind of a relationship that there's nothing that's, that can't be on the table, that you are open and can communicate about
Yes.
anything. I do remember when our son was in the 20s too, and personally, I found the 20s to be the most challenging, especially for males, for a variety of reasons. But I can remember, a few times there were conversations that uh, were very hard to listen to, and it was really hard not to, um, like be the teacher. It was really hard not to step in and say, look, you're really this is not good what's happening right now. Really, really difficult. But I strongly believe that the most important thing is that that line of communication is always kept open. And if a response that I am going to make is going to shut him down, then that's not what he needs in a mom. He needs that door open. And so when you can create that environment that your child can always share with you and know that he will be heard, maybe not, it's like the behavior. Maybe you don't really like the behavior, but you're always there for that little one inside. So, how did it happen that 11 years later you had another child?
Yeah, so that was, again, so the plan had been knowing that we were going to have twins was, and that it would be a C-section. We had told our doctor that, I was like, okay, since you're in there, tie everything up and we're done. That'll be 4 kids. Obviously, with the loss of our son, my husband and I weren't ready quite yet to shut that door. And it took us 5 years almost to say, I got to be about 37 or so. And my husband's 4 years older than me, so he's 41. Our son was getting ready to, my oldest was getting ready to graduate high school. And I looked at my husband and I said, you've got 6, we finally said, okay, we're going to try again, even with the odds and everything. And I said, you've got 6 months to get me pregnant. Again, thinking it wouldn't happen. I was like, oh, I'm 37. I've been on birth control forever. Those, yeah. Again, man makes plans, God laughs. A month and a half, I'm pregnant. It was actually really funny because the running joke was, I tend to be again, I'm a little type A, sometimes a little paranoid. So I was always the woman who was constantly pregnancy testing all the time. So I remember one morning, I had gone to wake him up for work and he rubbed my belly and he's like, oh, did you test you're pregnant? I'm like, funny you should say that. I was like, because I am. And I go downstairs and he's half asleep. He comes downstairs. I remember it. He comes downstairs and he's like, were you serious? And I'm like, yeah, surprise. Very proud of himself, by the way.
Mhm.
And at that point, it's like, oh, we need a bigger house. We need to start, making different moves. And there was a lot of anxiety with that pregnancy. Anyone who's had a rainbow baby, um, every ultrasound that I went to, every, oh my goodness, it was traumatizing,
Mhm.
because, I told my husband, I was like, I will never go to a doctor's appointment by myself again, ever. So he had to make his schedule work. Um, and it was kind of like with bated breath that we're like, okay, we just, even once we hit like 36 weeks, I think I finally relaxed a little bit. Only it's funny. So the day of my scheduled C-section, they're wheeling me in. They've got extra staff and I'm getting extra IV ports. And my husband's like, I don't remember you guys doing all this stuff before. And they're like, well, given all your pre-existing health conditions and your age, we just want to be sure. Then they kind of looked at my husband and they're like, you might have to make decisions. Yeah, that was the conversation that we had right before they wheeled me into the OR.
Wow.
Gotta listen sometimes. I look at my husband and I'm like, you know what decision you have to make. And he's like, no, I don't. So we're having that argument right, but thankfully he didn't need to make the decision. We still argue about it to this day though. Because I said you should, you would have picked the baby and he's like, nope, I would have picked you. And whatever.
Hmm.
But we have our rainbow baby. Um, and he's now almost 3. He's also not affected with the condition. We were blessed again. But again, totally different child. Like I've had to be a different parent for each child. He is highly intelligent, highly active, and very clingy. Um, Requires a lot of attention. And he's a baby, so he's spoiled rotten. Like absolutely. His sisters dote on him. He's adorable. He knows he's adorable, and he's so manipulative with it. He knows if he just goes like this and says, please, that's it. They'll give him whatever he wants. Um, yeah, so he's honestly a little terror. But he makes life interesting. And it's always so very funny. My older son complains because he's like, people are always asking if he's my son. And I'm like, well, he could be. I was close to, your age when I had
Yeah.
you. You know, and then I was just very happy. One of the goals that I had in life was to make it to 40 without being a grandma. Most people they look at turning 40 as this horrible thing. When I turned 40, it was a celebration. And my husband was like, "Why are you so happy?" I was like, "I made it to 40 and I'm not a grandma." And I told my son, I was like, "Give me another decade, please." I was like, "Let me make it to 50 now without being a grandma." But yeah, it's definitely it's very interesting. And I get asked all the time, like, what is it like? Like you're parenting an adult, you're parenting a toddler. I kind of take it as, again, like what I do with my daughter with my rare disease. It's given me a unique perspective. It's given me unique life experiences that I think I've been able to use to help serve others, I think. And
Hmm.
it's given me a talent that I did not know I had and was not on my bingo card. I was having this conversation with my son because, he's very insistent on what he wants to do with his life, of course, because he knows everything and he's invincible as every 21-year-old is.
Hmm.
I'm like, you better have plans B, C, D, E, and F. You know what I mean? And he knows my story. And I'm like, look, I was like, if I had told my 18-year-old self was going to move to Florida, get a PhD in psychology, and create this groundbreaking new therapy that was going to blow CBT out of the water. That was my goal at 18. And I didn't want kids. And, 23 years later, I did none of those things. There are things that I've done that if you had told my 18-year-old self that I had done, she wouldn't believe you. I'm a totally different person, and I've said so many times that we hear often, especially nowadays, don't lose yourself in parenthood. And I understand that side of the coin, absolutely. I think I found myself in parenthood because as an 18-year-old having a traumatic childhood experience, kind of knowing what I wanted to do, but not really. I found my true calling in having the challenges that I've had. So, and you talked about gratitude. There are days where, even though the journey sucked, not gonna lie, the journey absolutely sucked. There are still things about it that suck. I don't want my daughter to have this disease, obviously, but the destination has been worth it.
Yeah.
Like, I think I truly am where I should be with the people that I am doing the work that I'm doing. 100%. I'm totally fulfilled. And I'm okay with that.
Well, I think you got a beautiful story. Like, um, I think it's inspiring. I think it's very honest and very raw. And I appreciate, just how vulnerable you've been in talking about it. And I think, sometimes we, as parents too, like I see young parents today, and so many people are so caught up in things that seem to be so important. Like which after school class they're going to, what private school are they going to go to, what holidays will they take? And sometimes, and can feel pressure and overwhelm and anxiety and all of those things. But sometimes I think we really need to sit down and look at the bigger picture. Like, do we have a child who's happy and healthy? And, we can keep a roof over their head and food on the table. I mean, some of the other stuff really isn't important in some ways. Okay, so I want to get to, because now, I got a really wonderful view, overall view of your family life. So I'm going to go straight to the one of the final two questions. So I wanted to ask, what would be the title for a movie about your family life up to this point, and what would be a short synopsis of it?
Oh, goodness. I always say this kind of tongue in cheek, but one of the things I've thought about as a title is, how a dating app turned me into a rare disease advocate. Because I met my husband online. Um, so it would be, again, that one in a million freak thing that just happened, I guess. Or, you know, I don't know if we can do profanity on this podcast, but, you know, it would be like, welcome to the bleep show. That's another thing that I think it would, because, at the end of the day, my thing has always been, um, nobody really has it figured out. There's no magic formula. There's no book. There's no guide. Every child is going to present a different challenge, a different obstacle, and you're going to have to be a different parent to each child individually. I have 4 kids that I parent completely differently, and I have parented in now three different decades of my life.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not the same parent I was to the 21-year-old that I am to the 2-year-old and any of the other ones. Um, yeah, that's it enough in a nutshell. The authenticity, just be you, like you said. It's the small things that matter at the end of the day.
Would you say that, like, do you think a lot of the things connected with just how life rolls out, like you said, often not the way that we plan it? Do you think that a lot of it is destiny driven, but then it's up to you how you respond to that destiny that's thrown in?
I do. I always joke with my husband, like, especially when the kids are being particularly naughty. I'm like, what karma did I put into the universe? Or who the hell was I in a past life that I needed to learn some lessons?
Yeah.
And deep down, I think I believe that. Like, there was a lesson that I needed to learn, apparently, over and over again. And hopefully the universe has gotten the message that I've got the lesson down. But yeah, I mean, there's so many people who have stories more, traumatizing or difficult than mine. And people persevered in World War II and the Holocaust through horrendous things. Again, we're all given this one trip around the sun, and you're dealt the cards that you're dealt. And, again, it's what you make of it. I
Yeah.
really do believe that.
Yeah, I do too. And I do think that the challenges that you're given really are an opportunity. And if you can find the opportunity in it, then you grow from it. And then maybe you don't need to have the same, experience again once you've got what you need out of that lesson. All right. The last question I had before we wrap it up, and you kind of touched on it when you said that you weren't a grandmother yet, but when that time comes, for whichever child is the first child that's going to have start their own family in whatever way that begins, what advice, what wisdom would you share with them as they're starting to form a family?
Follow your gut, I think, is the best thing I can say. And that's pretty much my advice even now to my children. When they present me with a puzzle, a problem, I was like, what is your heart telling you? What is your mind telling you? If you block out the noise and just sit with it and think about it. Because I tell them, and they recognize that I'm a different parent with each child. Don't try to put and it's hard to do, put your belief system, your expectations onto this new life that you've created. They're going to tell you who they are. Your
Mm.
job is to nurture who they are. That's it.
That's beautiful advice. That's really beautiful advice. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I was really excited about this conversation, and now I'm so appreciative of what you have talked about. And I really do think there is so much wisdom in this conversation. There are so many things that a parent can take out of it that are going to help them in their thinking, in their practices. And so I thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me. And, to anyone out there who is struggling, you know, please reach out to someone. Mental health, September, we're recording this in September, and it's National Suicide Prevention Month here in the United States. And it's something that, as a mental health professional, I can't harp on enough. You matter, your children's lives matter, and they need you here as a parent, whole and healthy and well. And please seek out that help that you need from somebody. Please. That's all I ask.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really wonderful last bit of advice. Thank you.
If you're a parent raising a boy in today's complex world, be sure to explore sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll discover expert guidance and support designed to help you unlock your full parenting potential. As Amelia Gambetti says, this job is too difficult and too beautiful to do alone. Together we can explore this adventure and discover the magic of raising boys.